I'm explaining a film from 2017 titled Jungle. Spoilers ahead. Enjoy the content. In 1981, Yossi Ginsberg, a former Israeli soldier, embarks on a journey to Bolivia in South America. Yossi has a very strong sense of adventure, thus he enjoys going on trips and exploring new, difficult locations everywhere in the globe. Yossi meets Marcus, a teacher who is also an adventurer, aboard the ship as they are traveling. Following their introduction and quick friendship, they decided to embark on an expedition before pitching their tents in the designated camping area. Mark runs across Kevin, a climber and photographer, while they are out and about. It turns out that Kevin is a mountain climber who has scaled practically all of South America's peaks. As soon as he did, Yossi asked the woman he had just met to the tent for a drink. Yossi, Marcus, and Kevin traveled to La Paz the following day. Arriving in La Paz, Yossi took a walk and was greeted by a stranger who came from Austria named Carl. They got to know one another before chit-chatting and exchanging stories over beverages. Carl claimed to have seen interior tribes, gone gold mining, and visited the Amazon rainforest. Carl then encouraged Yossi to look for the Toromona tribe, who are rumored to have buried wealth, after demonstrating this with some of his expedition-related images. Yossi was even more thrilled when he heard this and asked his pals to join them. Each of them was requested for $50 to cover the cost of the trip supplies. They agreed and gathered supplies right away after Carl also made a promise of gold nuggets that they could take home if they wanted to participate. They all boarded a plane and traveled to the Amazon. Once there, they completed their adventure on foot. Yossi appeared enthusiastic about his journey as Carl described the prehistoric tribe to him that evening in the tent. The next day, they set out on their adventure in the rain again. As they travel more slowly, Marcus starts to get exhausted. Marcus yelled while shouting out for Carl, which irritated the other campers. Suddenly, something moved out of the woods, and it turned out to be a local man bringing his enormous cow. They ran into Carl once again and were greeted by the locals when they arrived in the Asarayama settlement. They spent the evening indulging in local tobacco and a little wine, passing the time in the quaint ambience of the hamlet. The next day, when Carl and the others are panning for gold in the river, Marcus is spotted assisting people who wish to get their health examined. While supplies were running short, they continued their trip down the river until they reached the forest. When Carl noticed the monkey, he shot him right away. They ultimately consumed the meat of the sad creature. The following day, Marcus' condition deteriorated and he needed to rest more frequently. He understood that this would just delay the mission, but there was nothing he could do, even if going back alone would be impossible. The following morning, after much deliberation, they decided to build a raft and wade the river so Marcus wouldn't be a burden. After the raft was finished, their journey was first extremely enjoyable until they eventually encountered a very rapid river flow. Yossi and his friend's selfishness irritated Carl, who left and went hunting in the forest after successfully navigating the river's rapid currents. Yossi went into the bush to meet up with Carl as the others camped down by the river while they waited. Suddenly there was a gunshot. It turned out that Carl was shooting at a jaguar that was stalking him. It appears that Kevin and Carl split up because they could not get along. Yossi and Kevin opted to cross the river on a raft while Carl and Marcus preferred to go through the forest. Yossi was warned by Carl to be cautious because there were numerous sections ahead with really fast rapids before they parted ways. Yossi traveled with Kevin without enough equipment or supplies, such as knives, to ensure their survival. The farewell was Kevin's last moment since, after that, Marcus and Carl stopped communicating and, as of this writing, are still missing. They were unbalanced as Yossi's raft arrived at a set of really powerful river rapids. They were hurled when the raft was swept away by a powerful river current. Yossi became caught on the rocks and was almost pulled away by the rapid river currents, but luckily Kevin survived. Kevin told Yossi to hang on and would lift him up. Sadly, Yossi was swept away by the fast-moving river as his raft was breaking apart. Yossi kept floating off into the distance till he eventually landed on a rock and gripped there. He tried to yell and check for Kevin but got absolutely no reaction. They ultimately parted ways in the afternoon when Yossi was still unable to locate any indication of Kevin's location. The following day, Yossi carried on by himself, quite hungry and exhausted. Yossi eventually came upon a tree with fruit, but just as he was ready to pick it, a snake struck him, causing him to fall. Yossi, however, stood up, re-entered the tree, and dispatched the snake. Yossi lay beside a tree that night that was draped in leaves. Yossi was traveling the following morning when all of a sudden a lump emerged on his forehead and he started to move. Short version, Yossi returned to spend the night in the bush and encountered Marcus in his dreams. However, by the time he lit the lantern, Marcus had vanished. Yossi sensed movement behind the bushes at the same moment he spotted a tiger following him there. The tiger eventually departed when Yossi used a gas canister to try to drive it away. Yossi felt even worse when he got up in the morning because of the bump on his forehead. He opened the lump out of dread, and a leech-like monster crawled out. Yossi returned to his quest and discovered 2 nearly hatched eggs. Since they had run out of food and were starving, Yossi had to eat the nearly hatched eggs uncooked. Yossi discovered the previous customary tent in the front that had been deserted by its occupants. Yossi paused to look at a map. Maybe he can find a route out of the jungle. Yossi's feet were covered in cuts from walking in damp or dry circumstances all the time. However, Yossi was left with little choice but to continue. For a brief second, Yossi flashed back to the day after he had just graduated from high school, when his father had urged him to enroll in college and declare a major in law, but Yossi had refused. Yossi could only look back on it now, but as soon as he recalled Carl's advice to stick near to the river, he started walking in that direction. According to reports, Kevin managed to live and was saved by locals. They took him to their hamlet, which was distant from the scene of his discovery. Yossi was still stuck in the forest when Kevin urged the local authorities to assist in finding him. At the same time, Yossi heard the faint sound of a jet, which turned out to be a search team organized by Kevin. Yossi then waved his coat as a signal, but they missed him since the jet was going too high. Unluckily for Yossi, the plane took off without him. Kevin was instructed to send out fishermen to search for Yossi after he failed to locate him from the air. Kevin persisted and bought the fishing boat to search for Yossi alone when the fisherman declined to assist him after learning that Yossi had been missing for 2 weeks and said that Yossi could have perished. Finally the fisherman agreed to accompany Kevin to look for Yossi and they finally left. Yossi's situation was becoming increasingly precarious, and he was in a terrible state because there was no longer a prospect for rescue. Yossi soon saw what he thought was sobbing. It turned out that the woman who was sobbing was a tribal member of the area who, when Yossi approached her, was terrified. Even though they couldn't speak one another's language, they eventually grew close. They resumed their trek the following morning despite Yossi seemed to be having significant difficulty walking. Yossi became increasingly irate at the fact that he never emerged from the jungle as they started to argue and fight. Yossi had never met the woman, therefore it appears that what he saw was really a hallucination brought on by his rage and melancholy. Yossi continued to move on despite his inability to discriminate between reality and hallucinations and the fact that he already appeared insane. Yossi's unfortunate fall into the quicksand, which nearly swallowed in his entire body and left him fatigued and dozing off, brought to his bad luck. Yossi tried to grab a hanging tree when he first came to, and after a long period of time in the quicksand, he eventually succeeded. Yossi was very weak, he almost gave up because he was very hungry and thirsty, but he heard whispers in his ear telling him to go to the bank of the river so he could be found easily. Yossi used what little power he still had to crawl toward a tree covered in ants, opened his clothing, and shook the tree, causing the ants to fall upon his body and bite him. He believed that he could scream in order to overcome his thirst, hunger, and exhaustion. Yossi had unknowingly reached the edge of the river, but he had discovered nothing there. Only turtles approached him at night, so Yossi spoke to the turtles to encourage him. Yossi had given up, he recognized that there was no longer any chance of being located and that he was simply dying. The following day, the fishermen and Kevin were spotted searching, but they halted the boat when they noticed the river's currents picking up speed. When they finally turned around to get home, Yossi awoke abruptly and noticed Kevin standing in front of him. Yossi attempted desperately to crawl toward Kevin and shout his name, but due to his extremely weak state, he was unable to simply yell. However, Kevin abruptly turned his head and caught a distant glimpse of Yossi. Yossi was weak and defenseless as Kevin turned around and rushed up to hug him. Kevin finally drove him to the village. The people welcomed Yossi and gave him their congratulations for making it out of the wilderness alive. Yossi and Kevin returned to their accommodation in La Paz once his illness improved. They also waited for Carl and Marcus for days but received no updates at all. As this movie comes to a close, Yossi and Kevin may finally learn important lessons from their individual experiences, such as the fact that their own lives are the most priceless gift. That is how it ends. Let me know what you think about this movie in the comments section. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to stay updated on future videos. Leave a like to support the channel.